I'm sure there were a lot of sleepless nights last night with the price now down $27,500 from the high. That is 22% from the top. Bitcoin is testing many key support levels right now, 50% levels, breaking through 50-week moving averages. Altcoins are getting absolutely annihilated, and it seems like several of those bear signals that we saw, the short-term downtrend signals around mid-October, are starting to follow through. Now, we could see a short-term bounce. I'll cover that in just a moment, but I want to get straight into the analysis for Bitcoin. Hit the like button if you find value from the content, of course, and subscribe to the channel. You can always unsubscribe later, but for now, we've got lots to cover as we continue to head into the peak of our favorite cycle here, the 18-year real estate cycle. Okay, so for Bitcoin, now sitting on the 100K, did test slightly lower at 99, just under that level, coming up towards the June 2022 low. So another seasonal time that put in a specific low. An interesting point here on the 4th and 5th of November, 12 months ago, was leading into the election. So an extreme emotional day there for crypto markets and markets in general. And funny enough that we saw the exact same thing 12 months later. Of course, we didn't see a new all-time high. That would have been lovely. But we have seen one of the most emotional days for some time. Obviously, we had $20 billion being liquidated on the 10th. And then 4 years ago, we also saw the all-time high price just before the next November top. 4 years ago, this time, November, look at that, 8th, 9th, 10th was the all-time high price. So I'm looking at this as emotional time periods in the market and time frames that we can look towards any sort of potential local lows to help rally the price out of these levels. Yesterday, we also took a look at the time frames to the downside and the 50% points of those time frames. The big question I've seen is I've put out an Instagram Q&A. If you want to follow that, just check out the links in the video description only for my real Instagram. There are a lot of fake accounts out there. Don't get scammed by those guys. The questions that I've seen come up with that Q&A is, are we going to see a low soon? So a lot of people have been asking that question. And there are a few reasons that we may see a local low. The first being is the sentiment. The fear and greed index is now 23 today. Yesterday was 21. And the meaning behind that is the divergence in price. The divergence in price between the sentiment as well. So you had Monday, a day down with 21, so more fear. And then yesterday, there was just marginally less fear on that day. So there is hope there that we could see a bounce from this point. The other thing is that we're on the 50% level right now. If we get these breakdowns, then I think these are going to be lower high bounces that we get. And this comes back to a couple of the paths that we looked at in the last few days, where we're hoping for support here, but planning for the worst, planning for any sort of downside if you just see this breakdown. This time frame that we're tracking now for the 50% of time for each of these corrections, so where there's local low come in, potentially is next Friday, somewhere around that time frame. That's essentially half of the time of the prior correction, 77 days down, and 77 is half of the prior correction to that, 144. And so we've seen this twice before. Maybe we get it for a third time here. The critical point in terms of where Bitcoin goes next is, where does the support come in? Higher support on the 50% levels, this one in particular around this 100K level, is going to give us a better chance to come up and test the next levels, 108, 116, and then of course the all-time highs. That would be the best case scenario, and then we can get out our best case scenario pathway into the highs. And of course we could know more at the weekly close, even if we get big wicks down to these levels, as long as the close is above the key levels, the 50%, and in many cases the 50-week moving average, which is roughly around 103,000 by the time the week closes. And of course we've got the 100K on the 50%. Then the wick would probably just be more liquidations, and this close is really where things get a little more serious and interesting for the bulls. Now, in regards to our checklist of events, 50% levels, I mean, that's getting really, really close to being on a downtrend here for a breakdown of 100. And then for the entire bull market, the big level much further down at about 71K, which would also be below the previous highs. So ideally, things hold up here and it starts to get going again. Swing charts, well, they're down on the daily and on the weekly. Volumes in ETFs, we have seen an increase in this sell-off. So that's also part of the potential local low, along with the sentiment reading and the price, obviously the divergence there. The next readings we have are the US stock market, which has also been down. So typically it's a little bit harder for Bitcoin cryptos to rally while there's a little bit of weakness there in the stock markets, which we'll cover in a moment. And MicroStrategy has been an absolute shit show. And strategy, of course, the company here, it continues to collapse, continues to go further down as it has done through this entire cycle, starting from November 2024. So this was the area that had the two Bitcoin tops, and it has also shown up on the previous cycle as an interesting one to watch, or a very important play to watch for the end of the cycle. You can see you had the MicroStrategy top around the most excitement for Bitcoin. So the biggest, greediest time was around February to March 2021. Bitcoin top, lower high for MicroStrategy, another lower high compared to the all-time high, whereas Bitcoin put in a new all-time high, and then everything started to collapse altogether. This cycle was no different. You had a new all-time high for MicroStrategy at the first greedy point, so extreme greed on your sentiment reading here for this cycle, and then the second extreme greed sentiment reading for this cycle. They were the two times that MicroStrategy put in new all-time highs. After that, when Bitcoin continued to put in new all-time highs, MicroStrategy continued to put in lower highs, barring this one here, which was July. That was an interesting time, but it quickly fell back underneath those levels and has since collapsed. Now it's on its last legs here. This is the last line of support at about $230. I think it's all but over in this case. Even if we saw lower prices and Bitcoin saw lower prices and started to rally, I think this is going to be another lower high there for MicroStrategy for this cycle. So the timeframes are still intact. We have 35 months from the low to the high. That was what happened in 2021 for the all-time high, and what happened in 2017 for the all-time high, and 2013 was a 37-month high. That means if it was going to be similar to 2013, we would need to see a low this month and then another rally to a new all-time high in December. Of course, anything is possible. We still have 26 days to go for the month. Closes above that 108K level is going to put it in a much better position come the end of the month, end of November, to have any sort of chance to break into new all-time highs for December. But if we get towards the end of November and things are still well below 100K or even just under that 100K level, it's probably unlikely. I'd have to lean far more to the side of the bears than the bulls at the end of the month if closes are underneath the 100K. Now we had our 3-day signal, which I'll cover in a sec. The sentiment, we've covered that. Things are looking a little bit dire in regards to crypto and Bitcoin sentiment. Composite cycle has diverged from what we were watching with the 5 and the 10 year, and Bitcoin has been down from that point, whereas what we saw 5 and 10 years ago was a pretty strong uptrend. 2020, big strong uptrend, and 2015 was also beginning an uptrend there. And the USD Dixie has been higher as well into those prices. So this is the 3-day signal from each of the prior tops that resulted in a 30% correction. And as I said in the intro, we're at about 22% correction. The 30% correction takes you down to 88K, which is that previous support. You also have the day there in January getting a low around 89. So 88 to 89K would be the same sort of correction that we've seen twice already in this cycle. However, it's from a weaker position now, because these two prior times, they had broken out of the highs and came back, tested the previous highs as support, and you've also got it on the 50-week moving average. They were also on our 50% levels. You can see from the lows to the highs, dead on that 50% level. The same thing for the collapse into April. You got the lows to the next lows. They went a little way through, but then closed back above it, and the bull market continued. So again, broke to new all-time highs, corrected, had room to move to get it to a negative 30% move down. But this time, if we're to see a 30% correction from this high is going to be underneath both of those readings now, both of the 50-week and also underneath the 50%, because that would then come out to 88K. So it's coming from a weaker position, which is why we don't want to see 30% for a continuation of the bull market. If we saw that repeat, I dare say you're going to have a lot of the analysts saying, well, it's the same thing that happened last time and the time before that this cycle, but it's coming at it from a weaker position. So keep that in mind if we do in fact see any sort of corrections down to the high $80,000. And I suspect if we get to that point, we're going to hear it all again. We heard all about QE, QT. We heard about money printing. We had people talking left, right, and center about global liquidity and M2s and any money supply wherever you are around the world. You heard about ETF buying. You heard about ETF launches for Solana and XRP and all sorts. You heard about interest rate cuts. You heard about all the bullish narratives in the world. But the markets also know about these. That's the point. Every single time when everyone's talking about this, I think it's possibly too late. So my thoughts here, my journal entry for the day, never fall in love with the narrative. Chances are they're cheating on you. The narratives are always cheating on you. And we're beginning to see this even more so as we lead into the peak. And you guys have seen this before. This is our bubble chart here. Just a look at some of the major asset classes that people are investing in and how they're beginning to roll over. The white line is the most important one here, and that's our home builders ETF. We've seen further declines day after day now. I think a breakdown now of around 100 takes us below the previous tops here, 100, 102, and that is really starting to look very, very weak, which is our canary in the coal mine for the end of the cycle. We've seen tops for the home builders ETF in prior cycles about 18 to 24 months before the rest of the market topped. Here is your white line topping. There are a couple of home builders that topped around 2005, and then you had a top for the S&P 500 in 2007, and gold again 2008 before a very significant correction. That's a 30+% correction, and of course Bitcoin comes later in the piece. So that's why I've been banging on about the end stage of the cycle, running into the peak and then the correction. If you want to see how we're trading and investing our capital, rotating through different assets through this stage of the cycle and into the collapse, check out TIA Investor. Plus you also get access to our community Discord here. You can see trading results, some of the economic reports as well, and of course TIA updates. I've just posted this one here. That's the Instagram Q&A. Links there to my real Instagram if you want to ask some questions over there on Instagram. Find that account. Don't follow the others over there. So the crypto data has slightly ticked up here. We're looking at daily exchange volume just increasing here at 54 billion, but I would prefer to see it increasing on up days, breaking out into fresh highs, giving us that volume run into new fresh highs, meaning a little more bullish. What have we seen today? Well, we've seen the volume uptick with a huge liquidation. $2 billion in the last 24 hours. We have a long short ratio, which has a 4% differential, which often, but not a guarantee, could give us a local low for a potential rally here. The search volume has skyrocketed, but again, it's on a down day as opposed to a breakout into new highs like we saw in August and like we saw in July and like we saw in May. You can see these other highs here have all been around very significant lows. The April tariff crash low, that was very, very high search volume, and March as things were beginning to come down. The only other time there was October, when we saw the $20 billion liquidation day. So search volume has definitely picked up, but not for the reasons that we want to see. The USDT dominance has been an absolute, I would say, lifesaver in this case because of the signals and signs it's been giving us to suggest that there is a top coming in. I never said all-time high and final end. I just said there is a top coming in. Now, it is a very, very similar pattern to last cycle where we saw a higher low between the Bitcoin all-time highs. So I'll put this on the chart so we can all play along together. There is your Bitcoin tops, and there is your lows for the USDT dominance. It started to consolidate. It broke out higher, tested again for the next all-time high, and guess what? It only managed to put in a higher low for the dominance and Bitcoin marginal higher high. Then this is the interesting period. This is where I think we're at now. You can see we've got this higher low forming above key support levels. We've seen a breakout here for the dominance. We've seen a breakdown. Hopefully you've been able to follow along with this and at least protect some of the position, especially on the more riskier assets. If you are still, more heavily invested in altcoins, shit coins, meme coins, hopefully you're not doing that SPX 6900 investing $1,000 a day sort of thing. Those guys have been absolutely destroyed, which is very, very sad to see, because we could just be following this chart and just holding back maybe some of that cash, not going so crazy towards end of cycles, right? So we're at this point. What happens next? To me, at least, I think we go into some sort of movements higher for the dominance. And I say some sort because you've got a breakout, a retest of the tops, another breakout, and then a retest of the tops. This could be that point where we see the lower high on the monthly chart for Bitcoin begin to form, and then Bitcoin continued down. Bitcoin's in the white, and the green line and the red lines here, that is the USDT dominance heading higher. So this is where we currently find ourselves now. I'll take this off so it's a little easier to see. You can see we're broken out of those tops. Ideally, we just get a bit of a pause and some testing of the highs. Otherwise, this thing is going to shoot towards 6%, 6.2%, which is where those previous tops were. And hate to say it, but if we start to break through 6.4, then you're looking at something crazy like last cycle where the dominance is just really going to skyrocket up there. So the 50% levels helped out very, very well here. We can take that now and move it to the previous high. And that gives us a new 50% level if this is heading higher at 6.6%. So we'll be looking for some resistance at that point. But to get there, you're going to see Bitcoin and crypto prices get absolutely decimated. This is just maths. More money is going to be going into USDT, less money is going to be going to Bitcoin and cryptos. And I've heard it all before, even more so in these last few weeks, where people have said, but they're printing more and more USDT and the market cap's going up and this is different and this is going to have higher lows through this entire period. Okay, again, it's the same flipping thing I hear over and over again. I just hear this crap going on, QT, money printing, global liquidity, yada, yada, yada. And then they try to do the same thing here. USDT is getting printed over and over again. Doesn't matter. Just follow the chart. I don't know how much more simple it can be. The chart is saying more money is going here. So even if you want to try and factor that in somehow, that there is more USDT now than there was last cycle, but there's also more cryptos. Also, the market caps are a lot higher. If you want to try and factor that in, go for gold. I don't know how you're going to do it. You're going to have to stuff around with every single market cap in the entire crypto space, but just follow the chart. It's so much easier. I don't know how much time people have in their days to screw around with those things. Anyway, that's my rant. This price is going higher. Even if we get some tests back, I think the only way to save this USDT dominance and basically bring back the bull market is a breakdown of that major 50% level, 4.75%. You see that? We're going to be laughing. It's got to be a breakdown. 4.75% gives us that test in those to come back and test that 4% level. Otherwise, it's heading higher. And we saw the same thing, or we are seeing the same thing with the combination here of USDT and USDC. So if you want to use that instead, here you go. The top's around 8.2%, and then your 50% is at 8.9%. Overall, you're seeing higher lows forming through this entire period of Bitcoin, which had put in higher highs, but more of that money is coming back into stablecoins. People are getting freaked out. They're not as risk on as they once were. And if this then heads through 8.9, call it 9% for a round number, that is a massive 50% level. Lots of tops there, lots of significant bottoms, and then I think you're going to run to that next level somewhere around that 11%. So that's a lot of money that would be back into stablecoins. If that continues to occur, goodbye to your altcoin season. I mean, that's just what the charts are saying to me. I hope others, just follow your own advice if you prefer that and you want to hear that there's going to be an altcoin season. I'm not saying that there isn't. There just doesn't look like it's right now. You've got dominance rising on stable coins. You have dominance rising for Bitcoin, which is falling, which means that Bitcoin is just falling less than basically everything else in the space. Everything is red now. It's only been 1 hour into the day. Just keep watching this. You've got 61.6%. And then you just got to look back towards the previous top, somewhere around 63, 64, 66% for dominance for any sort of signs of resistance. Now, in terms of altcoin season, it's continued to fall here. You want to see this line go up, or this chart go up if you're going to get an alt season, and it's continued to decline here over the last few months. I think you've got some more testing of 8 million and 7.5 million to go. In the meantime, Bitcoin against precious metals and stock markets has also continued to decline. Remember, we're watching this with regards to which assets are stronger at this stage of the bubble, the everything bubble. Let's bring this down here and take a look at Bitcoin, which has continued to fall after putting in a new all-time high in November, December of 2024, and after that first top. So it's basically underneath all those levels. And we looked at this earlier this year, a few months ago actually, where it began to put in lower highs. And if it's putting in lower highs, it's telling you something that it's possibly not going to be that strong. And it happened again on silver, Bitcoin versus silver. Silver has been the better play now for the last nearly 12 months. And you've seen more gains on silver, of course, and Bitcoin versus the NASDAQ. I mean, that has just continued to fall since the double top in May and July. So the market has said that they would prefer to have their money elsewhere, essentially outside of Bitcoin, and of course, outside of crypto from that point, just based on these assets alone. But what about Ethereum? Ethereum has continued to fall. It's broken the low. It's sitting on its 50% now at 3,200. Same sort of deal here. If this doesn't hold, then we can look back towards $2,800, which are the previous highs, and start to wipe out a lot of this extreme excitement that began in July. All those guys that, or anyway, there's, Bitmine and Tom Lee and the Ethereum ETFs, I think they're about to get absolutely annihilated after buying in so late into the cycle, basically changing their plans and just going into be Ethereum treasury companies. The only way they're going to get saved is if this price gets back above $4,100. That's all the previous highs of this cycle. We now have a new time frame to the downside. And in terms of any sort of rally to get out here, I'd be looking at something less than any of these rallies here. That's if this thing remains weak. You've got $930 in terms of a rally. From this low, you have $850. And so I think this next rally, if it is going to remain weak, is going to be less than roughly $800. It may come up and test these lows. It may come up and test the high of yesterday's bar. But if it's going to be a weak rally like a dead cat bounce, it will be less than each of those rallies there. Now, on the flip side, if it is a stronger rally and it keeps running, it's going to be more than this one here. So this is like our overbalance in time and price, $930. You're going to see a run from these lows of more than $930. So it's going to have to get back above that 4,100 anyway for signs of strength. So keep that in mind moving forward with any sort of buy the dip opportunities here across many of these cryptos. Solana has also continued to fall. 50% levels all around are getting crushed. Each of the levels have been broken now, 195, 175, and on the verge again of going under 150. And that's the major 50% level for this entire range, entire bull market to the top. XRP has finally closed underneath its 50% at $2.20 and basically cements its place in history for another cycle top caller in advance. The top came in July of 2025. That was that extreme month for Bitcoin as well. If you guys recall, BTC, we had a nice all-time high here on the 14th, and XRP put in its all-time high in July as well. Since then, 3 months to the downside into the 4th month right now. And throughout its entire history, it has done 12 to 13 months in any one direction. Here we are. It's happened yet again, and basically was an early sign for the bull market that things look like they were coming to an end. The S&P 500 is falling before the pit session. It is now underneath the previous all-time highs, putting some pressure onto Bitcoin and cryptos today. It is still following the 5-year cycle that happened from 2020. So the rise, the corrections, the rise again, the corrections, that is due to end roughly around the 14th of November. So the time frame that we're watching here for Bitcoin as well. Potentially, that's when the government shutdown ends. That is a huge speculation on my behalf. But yeah, we'll see whether that does occur sometimes towards end of next week. And the rest of that time, you've got well, November hopefully recovers, and then you go through this move into 2026, a bit of a grinding upways pattern. Now, the DXY has now past 100. So again, even more pressure on assets as the US dollar continues to rise here. You can see the DX is up, gold is down again, and silver is also down after putting in these tops, these hugely emotional tops with lineups outside bullion dealers around the world. And of course, right around that top, we then got the 3-bar down signal for gold. There's the all-time high, 1 day down, 2 days down, lower highs, lower lows. This is an inside day, forget it, doesn't interrupt the count. Another day down, and then 2 more to follow. So this is most likely a local top forming, but it could be a long drawn out local top like we've seen in the past for gold. This was several months. This was several years, but we are heading towards the peak of the cycle. So keep that in mind. I think we're going to see a few more significant scares in the market, just like what we saw in 2006, 2007. There were a couple of times where the market basically fell out of bed and then recovered. You've got this time here, February, pretty significant decline, then a recovery, another very significant decline in August, into August from July, and then a rally into a new all-time high, and that was the end there, October 2007. So I don't think it's going to be an easy run up into this high, especially as we've seen some pretty good moves up. This is for the stock markets, but with any of these declines, I don't think it's going to be the end yet, but we are getting very, very close to our peak in the 18-year cycle, especially as we've seen that now with the Home Builders ETF, possibly a local top for gold. And not that Bitcoin has too much to do with it at this stage, but Bitcoin also looks like it is struggling here. Last signs of hope, in my opinion, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you're doing now as a crypto trader. You got 2 options. Are you buying the dip, or are you going to sell the rally? Leave us some emojis down below. I'll see you on Instagram or on X. Use only the links in the video description. Until the next one, take care, peace out, and hopefully get some good sleep.